Canadians have and members of parliament must have when present to a situation where you're meeting in a room every single week and you still fail to, one, address the issues of cost, two, the issues of governance, and three, finally, the ability to actually come into an agreement that actually sees some of these issues having fair oversight, to me seems like a very, very tenuous connection between what you think is good governance and what is truly poor governance. This is a dramatic failure, Ms. Jeffrey, and one that has cost Canadians millions of dollars. We cannot simply say that there was good intention between the CBSA and the Public Health Agency of Canada. They met every week, but failed to address the questions of governance and failed to address the questions of cost. If that's what you're saying is true, then that has to be the case, or we're led to believe that this lack of governance went unquestioned, and the nature of these meetings were really not ones of governance. Which one is it?
I would say that the nature of the meetings at that time in March 2020 were focused on the significant time pressure to develop an app that would allow the border to permit the flow of critical people and goods. And so the operational outcomes were the overriding subject of conversation and the necessity of layering the public health measures. Unfortunately, as we've acknowledged, there was not formal governance throughout that time. And that lack of formal governance.
Did the minister know about that lack of formal governance?
I'm afraid that is the time, Mr. Desjardins. You will get another opportunity down the road.
Thank you, Chair.
Turning now to Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your attendance. I'd like to open with a comment. For the record, spending under Justin Trudeau's government on outside consultants and contracts has more than doubled, costing taxpayers $20 billion. And now we have a classic example of government waste and abusing the taxpayer. So I'm going to focus my questions to you, Ms. Jeffrey. You mentioned in the earlier rounds that ultimately you report to Minister Hajdu at the time during the implementation of the ArriveCan app. She was your direct minister. And you also reported to the PCO, the Privy Council Office. Is that correct?
Yes, the role of the President of the Public Health Agency of Canada.
Yeah, and directly reporting to the PCO is the clerk of the Privy Council is who you'd be reporting to, correct?
For the purposes of the administration of the public service.
Right. But during the course of the ArriveCan implementation, you are reporting to the Privy Council Office. And you are aware that the Privy Council Office literally acts as a deputy minister for the Prime Minister. Is that correct?
The Public Health Agency functions as part of a health portfolio.
I'm not asking about that, ma'am. I'm asking you about the structure of the Privy Council Office. That's the question. And would you agree with me that that really acts as a deputy minister to the Prime Minister?
Yes, that's one of the functions.
Thank you. Now, I want to know, without getting into specifics, I want to know about all the contacts, whether they be telephone, whether they be email, whether they be in person, all the contacts that you had with both Minister Hajdu and the clerk of the Privy Council during the implementation of the ArriveCan app. So how frequently, let's start with the Minister Hajdu, how frequently were you consulting with her and informing her about the implementation of the app?
So I would just clarify that it would be the role of the President of the Public Health Agency, since I've been in the role for 1 year, so not me personally. However, there was structured COVID governance focused on the measures that were being taken at the border. So here I want to distinguish.
Again, I'm not talking, ma'am, the question is very specific. I'm not talking about content. I'm talking about frequency. So whether you were in the role as the president or the deputy minister at all relevant times or another colleague, how often were you consulting, telephone, email, meetings with Minister Hajdu during the implementation of the app, but specifically the 177 versions of the app is the question. Can you provide an answer to that, please?
As it regards to the response to the COVID pandemic, the president of the Public Health Agency would have been in very frequent contact. I can't give a specific number, but in terms of the overall health response, the orders in council that developed the measures at the border, there was established governance that has been
Thank
publicly
you.
disclosed.
Now let's
about
move
the
on to the
response.
PCO. Same question, frequency. How often?
There were regular committees and governance structures that met about the COVID response.
Okay. And clearly you were not sharing with either Minister Haidu or the Clerk of the Privy Council all of the failings that the Auditor General has identified. Were you?
The responsibility to put in place the governing structure around the development of the app was...
Were you explaining to them about all the failings as identified by the Auditor General? Were you explaining to them that we have no contract, we have no budget? Were you giving some indication that this is really falling off the rails? Did you do that?
We were briefing, I'm sure at the time, on the operational requirement to stand up a digitized mechanism.
Did the
to
minister,
facilitate
did the
border
minister
travel.
or the Privy Council, the Clerk of the Privy Council, ever ask you about costs? Yes or no?
I was not in the role at the time, so I can't speak to that specifically. But I can say that the development of the app and the time pressures and the operational requirements.
It sounds to me, ma'am.
And that is the time, Mr. Brock.
Thank you.
I'm afraid. Ms. Khalid, a good day. You have the floor for 5
thank
minutes,
you.
please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. You know, I think I've said this before with other witnesses during committees that we've been able to question. I am very, very disappointed with how this whole procurement process has happened, and with a disregard, in my opinion, for public dollars, for taxpayer dollars, in how we conducted ourselves. But I do want to get to the accountability piece of it, and I know that the Conservatives are doing their thing, but I do want to put the question to our PHAC officials. Did the Prime Minister sign off on these contracts?
These contracts were concluded at different levels in the public service.